I left town for 10 days, and when I came back, someone had poured a concrete foundation on my land. Not near it, not close to it, but squarely inside it like they owned the place. At first I thought I was seeing things, like maybe the angle of the road was messing with my eyes, or I was just tired from the drive. But the closer I got, the worse it looked. Tire tracks cutting across my grass, churned up dirt, and right there, where I knew every inch by memory, sat a fresh slab of concrete with steel rebar sticking out like it had been there all along. I just sat in my truck for a second with the engine running, hands on the wheel, trying to make sense of how something that big could appear on my land in less than 2 weeks without me knowing. I'm not the kind of guy who scares easy, and I'm definitely not new to dealing with land or property lines. I bought that place outside of Mill Ridge about 8 years ago, 5 acres tucked at the end of a long gravel road, surrounded by trees and open field, the kind of place where you can hear the wind before you hear people. That quiet was the whole point, honestly. I'd spent most of my life working in noisy environments, construction, machinery, deadlines, always something going on, and when I finally had enough saved up, I wanted a place where nothing happened unless I wanted it to. And for a long time, that's exactly what it was. The land next to mine had always been empty, just tall grass, a couple of leaning fence posts from some old farm that probably went under decades ago. Nothing special, but I liked that it stayed that way. Then about a year before all this happened, a couple bought that lot. Ryan and Melissa Carter seemed normal enough at first. You know how it is out there. You don't become best friends with your neighbors, but you wave, you exchange a few words about the weather, maybe talk about how the road gets muddy after a storm. Ryan had that confident, always in a hurry kind of energy, like he was juggling a dozen things at once, while Melissa was quieter, more observant, the kind of person who listens more than she talks. I didn't think much of them beyond that. A few months after they moved in, I started noticing survey flags popping up near the property line, little colored markers sticking out of the ground like breadcrumbs, and then wooden stakes, string lines, the usual signs that something was about to get built. I remember standing there one evening, looking out across the field, thinking, well, guess I'm not going to have an empty lot next door forever, but that's life. People build houses, nothing wrong with that. What I didn't do, and maybe this is where I messed up, was walk the line with them, double-check everything, have that conversation early, because in my head, that was their responsibility. Then came the trip. 10 days out of state for a job I couldn't pass up. Everything was normal when I left: grass, trees, open land next door, the same quiet I'd gotten used to. I locked up, loaded my truck, and didn't think twice about it. The whole time I was gone, not once did it cross my mind that anything back home would change, let alone something like this. The drive back felt longer than usual, maybe because I was tired, maybe because something in my gut already knew something was off before I even saw it. And sure enough, the moment I turned onto that gravel road, I could tell. The surface was torn up in places, deeper tire grooves than usual, the kind heavy equipment leaves behind, and as I got closer to my place, I saw piles of dirt stacked near where my property line ran. That's when my stomach dropped a little. Not panic yet, just that slow, creeping realization that something wasn't right. I pulled up, cut the engine, and stepped out into a kind of silence that didn't feel normal anymore, like the land itself had been disturbed. And then I saw it clearly, a rectangular concrete foundation, still pale from drying, wooden forms framing the edges, metal rebar sticking up in a grid, like the skeleton of a house that hadn't been built yet. It wasn't subtle, it wasn't a small mistake, it was a full foundation, poured and set, like someone had made a decision and never once thought to question it. I walked over slowly, boots crunching on gravel and loose dirt, and I remember actually saying out loud, "No, no way," like saying it might somehow make it not real. But it was real. I could see where the forms had been removed, where the concrete had spilled slightly at the edges, still rough in places. This had been done recently, days ago at most. That's when I went back to my truck and grabbed the folder I kept in the glove compartment, my original survey, the one I had done when I bought the property. I'd marked the boundaries myself back then, drove in metal stakes, made sure I knew exactly where my land began and ended. I'm particular about that stuff, always have been. So I walked the line, one marker to the next, checking each one, brushing dirt away where needed, and every step just confirmed what I already knew deep down. The foundation wasn't close to the line, it was several feet inside my property. I stood there for a while, just looking at it, running through possibilities in my head. Maybe the survey was wrong. Maybe they had a different map. Maybe there was some kind of overlap I didn't know about, but none of it made sense. This wasn't a few inches off. This was obvious. This was careless, or worse. I pulled out my phone and called Ryan. He picked up on the third ring, sounding distracted, like he was in the middle of something. "Hey, what's up?" he said, casual, like it was any other day. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk about that foundation you guys just poured." There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "Yeah, what about it?" "It's on my land," I said, plain and simple. "Not near the line, on my property." Another pause, shorter this time, followed by a slight shift in his tone, less friendly now. "That doesn't sound right. Our builder measured everything." "I've got a survey," I replied. "And markers. I'm standing on them right now. That slab is inside my boundary." He let out a small breath, like he was already annoyed. "All right, I'll talk to the builder, see what's going on. Maybe there's a mix-up." "Yeah," I said, "there is." We hung up after that. No resolution, just that vague promise to look into it. And I stood there staring at that foundation again, feeling something settle in my chest. Not anger yet, not fully, but something close. Because deep down, I had a feeling this wasn't going to be a quick fix. And I wish I could say that was the worst of it, but that was just the beginning. The next couple of days told me everything I needed to know, not from what Ryan said, but from what he didn't. I gave him time, I really did. Figured maybe his builder messed up and they'd come back. Own it. Fix it like reasonable people. But instead, nothing. No call, no update, no apology. And then on the third morning, I woke up, poured myself some coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and saw a flatbed truck rolling down that gravel road toward the slab. That was the moment something shifted in me. Because that truck wasn't coming to fix a mistake, it was bringing lumber. I stood there, coffee in hand, watching like I was witnessing something I couldn't quite stop yet. Stacks of wood getting unloaded right next to that foundation. Workers laughing, measuring, moving like everything was perfectly normal. Like they weren't standing on land that didn't belong to them. And I remember thinking, they're not confused. They've made a choice. So I walked over. One of the guys looked up, gave me a quick nod. "Morning." "Morning," I said, calm, probably calmer than I actually felt. "You guys working for Ryan Carter?" "Yeah," he said. "We're framing this one next week." I let that sit for a second. "You might want to hold off on that." He frowned a little. "Why's that?" "Because you're standing on my property." That got their attention. Not panic. Just that look people get when they realize something might be off, but they're not sure how big the problem is yet. One of them pulled out a phone, probably to call the boss, and I didn't stick around after that. There was no point arguing with workers who were just doing their job. Instead, I went back inside and called a lawyer. Now, I'm not someone who jumps straight to legal action. I've always believed most things can be worked out with a conversation. Maybe a handshake if both sides are decent enough. But this didn't feel like one of those situations anymore. This felt like someone testing how far they could go. The lawyer's name was Daniel Mercer, older guy, steady voice, the kind of person who doesn't rush his words because he doesn't need to. I drove into town that afternoon, laid everything out on his desk, the original survey, photos of the foundation, the markers, and he didn't say much at first, just studied it all carefully. Finally, he leaned back and said, "Well, if your survey is accurate, this is pretty straightforward." "It is accurate," I said. He nodded. "Then the next step is simple. We verify it again, officially. Remove any doubt." And that's exactly what we did. A week later, a licensed surveyor came out, ran all the measurements again with proper equipment, documented everything down to the inch, and when the results came back, there was no gray area left. The entire foundation sat clearly inside my property line. Not overlapping, not borderline, fully inside. That's when things got serious. Daniel drafted a certified letter, formal, precise, no room for interpretation. It laid out the facts, included both surveys, and gave them two options: remove the foundation themselves within a set time frame, or I would have it removed and pursue full reimbursement for all costs. I remember reading that letter before it was sent, sitting at my kitchen table, the late afternoon light coming through the window, thinking, this is it. This is where they either do the right thing or they don't. A few days later, we got a response, but not from Ryan. It came from his lawyer. That alone told me a lot. The letter was polite on the surface, full of phrases like honest mistake and unfortunate misunderstanding. But underneath it, there was something else, a kind of quiet assumption that this could all be negotiated away. They asked if I would consider selling them that portion of land, or granting an easement, so they could keep the foundation where it was. I actually laughed when I read that. Not because it was funny, but because it was bold. They hadn't asked before they poured the concrete. They hadn't checked after I told them. They just built, and now they wanted to talk about compromise. I drove over to their place that evening. Not angry, just done with the back and forth. Ryan was outside, pacing near his truck, phone in hand. He looked up when he saw me, already tense. "You got the letter," I said. "Yeah," he replied, jaw tight. And we responded. I saw. There was a pause, the kind where both people know this isn't going to be friendly. "Look," he said, "this was a mistake. The builder messed up the measurements. We're trying to fix it without blowing everything up." "Fix it," I said. "You poured a foundation on my land. And we're offering to make it right," he shot back. "We'll buy that section from you. Name your price." I shook my head slowly. "It's not for sale." His expression hardened. "Everything's for sale." "Not this," I said. "That spot. Right there. That's where I plan to build my workshop." He let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. "Come on, you're telling me you'd rather tear all this down than just take the money?" "Yes." That hit him harder than I expected. For a second, he just stared at me, like he was trying to figure out if I was bluffing. "You're being unreasonable," he said finally. "No," I replied, calm but firm. "I'm being clear." We stood there in silence for a moment, the kind that feels heavier than shouting. Then he said, "We're not tearing it down." And just like that, the line was drawn. Over the next few days, they didn't slow down. More materials showed up, more activity around the site, like they were betting I wouldn't actually follow through. Like this was a game of pressure, and whoever blinked first would lose. But here's the thing. I don't bluff. I met with Daniel again, went over everything one last time, and he looked at me and said, "If you proceed, we'll document it thoroughly. You're within your rights." I nodded. "Then let's proceed." Hiring the demolition crew felt strange, I won't lie. There's something about bringing in machines to tear something apart that makes it all feel very real, very final. But at the same time, there was a sense of clarity I hadn't felt since this started. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about boundaries. The crew was scheduled for the following week. Excavator, concrete breaker, dump truck. Everything needed to remove that foundation completely. I also had the surveyor come back out, along with Daniel, to document the entire process, start to finish. No room for arguments later. The night before they arrived, I didn't sleep much. Not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew what it would lead to. And I was right. Because the next morning, everything changed. The crew showed up just after sunrise, engines rumbling low as they rolled down that gravel road like something out of a movie. An excavator on a trailer, a concrete breaker, a dump truck, everything you'd need to erase something that wasn't supposed to be there in the first place. And I was already outside when they arrived, hands in my jacket pockets, watching it all come together with that same quiet feeling I'd had building for days. Not anger, not nerves, just certainty. Daniel pulled in a few minutes later, stepped out with his usual calm, carrying a folder thick with paperwork, and right behind him was the surveyor, setting up his equipment again like we were about to prove the same point one more time, just in case anyone still wanted to argue reality. No one said much at first, just nods, a few short exchanges. This wasn't a social visit. This was procedure. Before anything started, Daniel sent one final notice to Ryan and Melissa. A courtesy, really, a last chance to step in, say something, stop it before it went any further. They didn't respond. And that silence said everything. Around mid-morning, the operator climbed into the excavator, adjusted his seat, tested the controls, and then looked over at me like he was waiting for a signal. I remember that moment clearly, because it felt like a line you can't uncross once you step over it. I gave a small nod. And just like that, it began. The breaker came down hard on the edge of the foundation with a sharp crack that echoed across the field, louder than anything I'd heard out there in years. And for a second, everything else disappeared. No wind, no birds, just that sound of concrete splitting under pressure. Again and again, each strike carving fractures through something that had been poured like it was permanent. Chunks started breaking off, rough, jagged pieces getting pulled away by the excavator's claw, steel rebar bending, snapping, dragged out like bones being unearthed, and I stood there watching it all happen, not saying a word, just taking it in as the thing that shouldn't have existed slowly disappeared piece by piece. By noon, half of it was gone. By early afternoon, there was nothing left but rubble, and by late afternoon, it was like it had never been there at all. The ground was cleared, leveled, the debris hauled away in the dump truck, leaving behind nothing but disturbed soil and a faint outline where the foundation used to sit, like a scar that hadn't fully healed yet. I walked over once the machines shut down, boots sinking slightly into the soft dirt, and just stood there for a minute, looking at the empty space. That was my land again. Quiet, the way it was supposed to be. The next day, they showed up. No warning, no call, just pulled up fast, truck doors slamming hard enough to echo, and Ryan came storming across the yard like he'd been holding it in all night. Melissa followed behind him, not yelling, but just as tense, arms crossed tight like she was bracing for impact. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted before he even got close. I didn't move. I removed something that didn't belong there. "You destroyed our foundation," he snapped, pointing back toward the empty space like it was still there. "You built it on my property." "It was a mistake," he yelled. "And you just, what? Decided to go nuclear." I let out a small breath, steady, controlled. "I gave you options. You ignored them. That doesn't give you the right." "It does," I cut in, calm but firm. "Legally, it does." He stopped for a second, thrown off by the lack of emotion in my voice, like he expected me to meet him at his level, match his anger, but I wasn't going to do that. Not anymore. Melissa stepped forward then, quieter but sharper. "Do you have any idea how much that cost?" "Yes," I said. "And now you're also covering the cost of removing it." Ryan let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "We're suing you." I nodded slightly. "You can try." There was a long pause after that. Heavy, uncomfortable, the kind where reality starts settling in whether you like it or not. I reached into the folder I'd brought out with me and handed him copies of both surveys, along with the certified letter they'd ignored. "You should read those again," I said. He took them, not looking at me anymore, just flipping through the pages with quick, frustrated movements, and I could see it in his face, that slow shift from anger to something else. Not acceptance, not yet, but the beginning of it. They left without another word. The next few months were quieter on the surface, but underneath it, everything moved through lawyers and paperwork, filings, responses, the kind of process that drags on just long enough to wear people down. I didn't talk to them during that time, didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said was already in writing. When the ruling finally came through, it wasn't dramatic. No big courtroom moment, no speeches, just a decision, clear and simple. The construction had been entirely on my property, and I had been within my rights to remove it. They were ordered to cover the demolition costs, the surveys, and my legal fees. That was it. Clean. Final. A few weeks after that, I saw construction start again on their side, this time noticeably farther back, well within their boundary. New stakes, new measurements, everything double-checked, like they weren't about to make that mistake twice. We never had another real conversation after that. Just the occasional glance from a distance, not friendly, not hostile, just something in between, like two people who learned something the hard way and don't feel the need to revisit it. And me? I went back to my routine. The quiet came back. The land felt like mine again. But every now and then, I still think about it. Not the concrete, not the legal stuff, but that moment when they chose to keep building after they knew. Because that's really what this was about. Not a mistake. A decision. And I guess the real question is, what would you have done? Would you have taken the money, let it go, avoided the conflict? Or would you have done exactly what I did and torn it all down? Because out here, once you let something slide, it rarely stops there. If you've ever dealt with something like this, or if you think I handled it wrong, I'd actually like to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you stand on it. Because situations like this, they don't always have clean answers, just consequences. And sometimes, the quiet you protect says more about you than anything you build on it.